Alright, David Harry here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to put together a 1TB external SSD for your iPhone 15 Pro Max, which will also work with all the iPhone 15s. And this particular setup is not only very cost effective, it is also the fastest SSD combination that I've managed to put together so far, and that has been amongst a lot of different combinations. I've got other combinations which are kind of quite close to it, or maybe slightly faster. However, they cost a lot more money. This particular combination here is super fast and also very cost effective. So what I've got here is a Sabrent enclosure, and I've got the Samsung 980 SSD. Now, just before I get into showing you how to put this drive together, which is super easy, and then I will also show you some speed tests which are extremely impressive. Before I do that, I just want to explain a few things. So the first thing to explain is why I am totally recommending this particular combination, and it is simply down to one thing. It works, absolutely works completely. What it is, I've already done videos where I've shown people particular combinations of SSDs which will not work with any of the iPhone 15s. So basically, if you're using something which is, say, Thunderbolt 4 USB 4, they will generally just not work whatsoever, regardless of what type of SSD you've got in them. Even with Gen 3 NVMEs, they still don't work. Either they might flip up at some point, but you won't be able to read and write to them, or they simply won't be seen. Now, there are other combinations which are unable to be seen, and they would be using, say, one of these Sabrent enclosures or any other good USB-C to NVMe enclosure. But using a Gen 4 drive inside of them, they definitely will not work from all the tests that I've been doing. So the combination of using a Gen 3 SSD with an enclosure like this is definitely the way to go. And like I say, this one has been thoroughly tested and the speeds are absolutely ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous because it was cheaper for me to put this together than, say, buy a T7, for instance. And this is way faster than the Samsung T7. So honestly, a fantastic drive system. Anyway, what I'll do, I'll get into this whole showing you how to put it together, the build process, which, like I say, is super easy. Then I'll do some speed testing and stuff like that. Then I'll come back at the end for a bit of an end summary. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is to show the parts that we're going to be using to put this drive together. Then what I will do is show how to put it together, and then I will do a timing of it as well, just to show you how quickly it is to do. Now, what we've got here is the Sabrent enclosure, and then here is the SSD 980. I'll probably just call this the SSD. And then what we've got here is a nice short USB-C to USB-C cable here, which comes with the Sabrent enclosure. Now, obviously, the one thing that we have to remember here is that the enclosure is 10 gigabits per second, and so is this cable. So obviously, this entire system is designed to work up to 10 gigabits per second. So just taking a quick look at the outside of the Sabrent enclosure first of all, and on this end here, we've got our USB-C port, and as we should be able to see there, that has got a 10 on it, which is just an indication to tell us that it is indeed a 10 gigabits per second USB-C port. And then next to that, we have got what looks like a hole. That is actually an activity indicator. So there's an LED behind here which is blue, and that'll kind of flash accordingly and switch on depending upon what the activity is that's going on with the actual drive. And then on the other end of the enclosure, we have got this button here, which when we press it in, will release a clamp to allow us to open up the top of the enclosure. So let me just show you this. I'm just going to press that button in, and then as we can see, it opens up the enclosure. So what we're looking at here now is the inside tray area of the enclosure, and this is where we actually put in the SSD. Now, there's only two things in here that we have to be concerned about. One thing here is the M.2 socket at the end, and what we do is just plug the SSD straight into that, and I will show you that shortly. And then at this end here, we have got the locking mechanism which locks down the SSD once it's in place. Now at the moment that is in the open position, and then what we do once the SSD is inside, we just twist that down like that into this position here, and then that will lock the SSD into place. Now what we're looking at here is the top half of the enclosure, and this is basically like a lid. So this is the bit that kind of flips over and then snaps into place. Now what it is, this bit here is made of aluminium, so this becomes a heat sink. Now in order for this to connect directly to the SSD when it's inside, we've got this thermal pad here. Now the thermal pad is behind this kind of like pinkish protective layer here. I say pinkish, I'm slightly colorblind, but I think it's pink. Anyway, what we do, we simply just peel the end off here and it reveals the blue pad underneath. So we rip that right off and then just like have the blue pad on its own, and then we close it over, and that blue pad will then make contact to the SSD on the inside, and then that will give us our thermal connection. Now just to be clear, when I actually do the timing and how we connect this all together, I'm not going to totally take that off, and the reason why is because I'm going to be using this enclosure on another system, so I need to leave that kind of like protective layer there, you know, still left on it, so that I can show it again in another video. It's only because I'm a cheapskate and I'm not going to go out and buy another one of these enclosures when I've got one that I can do multiple videos with. So going back to the inside of the enclosure here, I'm just going to show you how easy it is to insert the SSD into the enclosure. Now before I go any further, just make sure that you've got this mechanism here into the open position. Now what we do, we just take the SSD and then we take the connector end of the SSD and put it into the M.2 slot here. So you just push it in, give it a little bit of a push. You might hear it slightly click. Just make sure it is properly in place. Now we can kind of tell when it's properly in place, because if we turn it onto its side like that, as we will see, the SSD will kind of hold a position up in the air like that. So we definitely know then that the SSD is definitely, you know, connected properly into that slot there. And then all we do at this point is to push down the SSD as far as it will go inside the enclosure there. And then we just turn that lever there, that locking mechanism, down like this. So I'm just going to twist it down like that. And then that's now locked the SSD into place. And then what we do, we just peel back that protective layer on the thermal pad there, so rip it right off, and then we just simply close the whole thing over like that. And then at that point, that is our drive all put together. So what I'm going to do now is time myself to see how long this actually takes, because it is super quick and it will show you just how easy it is. But don't forget, I will not be completely removing that protective layer from the thermal pad. Okay, so what I'm going to do now then is hit start on the stopwatch here, build the SSD, and then once I've built the SSD, I will hit stop. And this is just going to give us a clear idea of exactly how long this takes to do and just how simple that it is. Okay, so here we go. So start. So first thing I'm going to do is open up the enclosure there. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that that lever is in the open position. I'll take the SSD, put it into the end there, into the M.2 slot. I'm going to push it down, close the lever over. I'm going to pretend to rip off that protective layer from the thermal pad, so rip it off. Then I'm going to close it over, and then it should click, and then I'll hit stop. Okay, so 30 seconds. Okay, now obviously I could have done that a bit faster if I wasn't talking. However, I think it'd be very fair to say that the longest it should take is 30 seconds. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to plug in my USB-C cable into the end, and don't forget this USB-C cable comes with the enclosure. I'm then just going to plug the other end of this into my Mac using the Thunderbolt ports on the Mac. However, obviously this drive will connect to anything which is Thunderbolt 4, Thunderbolt 3, or USB-C. So I'm just going to connect that to my Mac and I will show you how I go about formatting the drive. Okay, so I've just connected the SSD to my Mac, and as you can see here, it has actually popped up as untitled. Now, the only reason why I can see this at the moment is because it has already been formatted. However, when you're connecting, say, a brand new SSD, say to an iPhone or to the Mac, sometimes it may not just simply show up. And the reason why is because sometimes these SSDs just have not been pre-formatted. And that's the reason why they wouldn't show up on your Mac or even on an iPhone. So obviously what we're going to be doing here is to format it so it does show up, and obviously it would then show up on something like an iPhone as well. So what I'm going to do first of all is to launch the disk utility. Now, if you know where that is, you just go ahead and then just launch disk utility. If not, if you just come up here to the search tool, click on the search tool and then just start typing disk utility. As we can see there, disk utility will come up straight away as soon as you start typing disk. So I'm just going to tap on disk utility. Now, once in disk utility, the first thing that we need to do is come up to here where it says view. We tap on there and just make sure that it shows show all devices. Now, the reason why we want that to happen is just so that we can see the full structure of the drives that are attached to the Mac. Now, also at this point, it is worth unplugging any other external drives, whether that's SD cards or external SSDs or anything. Just unplug any other external drives, and this will just make sure that you do not accidentally erase or format the wrong drive. So as we can see here, it's coming up saying Sabrent Media because that's obviously the name of the enclosure being used. So whatever it is that you have here, what you do, always click on the root here. Don't click on anything like containers or anything like that. Always click onto the root there. Then what we're going to do is come over here to where it says erase. So we'll tap on erase. Now what we want to do here is select, or I'm going to select exFAT here. Now I'm going to recommend exFAT for anybody who is going to be using their external drive, say with Windows and stuff like that. In fact, let me just get rid of this here. So exFAT will definitely be more compatible with different operating systems. If you knew for a fact that all you were going to do was like stay within like, you know, the Mac domain, then what you would do is to choose APFS like that. However, I'm going to choose exFAT because I will inevitably use this disk and share it with Windows systems and also Android. So what I'm going to do here is give it a name. So let me just give it a name. So I'm going to call this 1TB, let's see, exFAT. Okay, so 1TB exFAT. exFAT is the format and GUID partition mapping is selected for the scheme. So we'll just hit erase there. Now this will just take a few moments. It'll unmount, format and then remount. As we can see, it's done that. So I'm going to click done. I'll come out of there, and then as we can see, there is now this newly formatted drive, and there's the name for it. Okay, so on to the actual speed testing then. So what I'm going to do first of all is to just open up the Files app there, and then I'm going to connect the SSD to the phone. Let me see if I can do this without disturbing the position of the phone too much. So if I can get that SSD a bit into shot there. It might move a little bit. It's only because it is on a short cable, so there isn't much leeway in it. However, these shorter cables are technically better cables to use. I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but when you use a shorter cable, they are potentially faster than longer cables. And also, once you go past a certain length, you will no longer be able to connect for data. So you've only got so much of a length that you can use for doing data transmission. However, the shorter the cable like this one, the better it actually is as well, or potentially it's better as long as the cable is of high quality, which this one does appear to be, because I will freak you out in a minute with some speedy numbers. Anywho, as we can see, there is the SSD there. So what I'm going to do is go to the phone's internal storage. I'm going to get this file. Now, if we have a look here, in fact, we'll see it says 72.03 gigabytes for the file. It is indeed 72,026 megabytes. So I will use that number during my calculations for working out how many megabytes per second this all happens in. But nonetheless, what I'm going to do here is to copy the file there. So where's copy? There it is. And then I'm going to come back here I'm going to select the SSD. Now what I'm going to do is paste the file, and as soon as I do that, hopefully I hit start on the timer at the same time. So let me just stay quiet while I do that. Okay, I successfully done that. You wouldn't believe how many times I don't get both of those hit at the same time. Anyway, so what's going to happen here? The stopwatch is just going to time its way through. So what I'm going to do is just speed up the video, and then I will come back just before it's moved over, and then I will hit stop, and then we will get a reading for this movement of the data. Okay, I'm going to come back in here, and as soon as that blue dot is full, I'm going to hit stop. So stop. Okay, so we're going to call that 1 minute and 19 seconds. Let me just make a note of that. So that is the iPhone 2, the SSD. That's 1 minute and 19 seconds. So I've just made me note there. Now what I'm going to do is I will go to the internal storage here on the iPhone, and then I'm going to delete that file and then copy it from the external SSD to the internal storage of the phone. So let me just delete the file first. So where are we? Delete. Now what I'm going to do quickly is just come to the bin. So I'm just going to tap on the bin and do delete all. So delete all. This is just to make sure that there's no residual kind of file hanging around within the phone. So let me just tap on the bin there. As we can see, there's no data in the bin. Now, just on like a quick note here, you do not have to switch the phone off and on and stuff like that when you do these types of things. As soon as you say delete that file and empty the bin, the file's gone. There is no residual anything hanging around that could interfere with any of these tests and stuff. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is that I've had people like piping up in like some of my videos saying I should be switching the phone off and on and stuff like that. That is absolute nonsense. Let's look at it this way. If you did anything on any app to change any of its memory allocation and stuff like that, and any buffering, which loads of apps do, if you were expected to switch the phone off and then back on just to reopen a new app, imagine how tedious that would be. Anywho, let me get on with it and stop bitching about stuff. So what I'm going to do here is go to the external storage, the SSD. I'm then going to do copy. Then I will come back here. I will go and select the internal storage. Make sure to reset the stopwatch. And once again, I'm going to do the paste and start thing, and hopefully I get it done at the same time. So give me a second. So boom. Hey, and I got it right. Okay, so what we're doing here then is to test the movement of the data from the SSD to the internal storage. And once again, I will just speed up through this and come in at the end and get the timing. Okay, I'm just going to come back in, and as soon as that blue dot's full, I'm going to hit stop. So there we go. Okay, so I'm going to call that 1 minute and 15 seconds. Let me just make a note of that here. So 1 minute and 15. Now what I'm going to do is just go away, quickly do some calculations, and we will work out in megabytes per second how long this is taken to do, or basically how quick it's taken to do. Oh, actually, I've just thought of something which is pretty cool here. What I'm going to do is to play that file from the external SSD here. So let me just go to the external SSD. Now what it is, before I play it, this file is actually ProRes 422HQ, and it is 4K 60 frames per second. This is actually a file which is recorded off an Atomos Ninja. So like I say, ProRes 422HQ 4K 60. So let me just get this out of the way, and obviously we're playing this directly off the external drive here. So let me just start playing this. In fact, let me get the orientation right, and as we will see here, that's going to play perfectly. Now the thing is here, it might look slightly weird only because this is 60 frames per second playing here and the camera's recording at 25. But if I start doing things like scroll the timeline, look at that. That is just unbelievably fast. And then if I let go, let's just see how long it takes to catch up to play. Look at that. That is just absolutely insane. So, oh wait, they've nearly moved the whole thing off. What am I doing? There we go, a bit more scrubbing there. And again, really fast at picking it up. So as we can see, that is super responsive. So this will give you a really good idea as to what this drive would be like in playing files externally. And right now, hold on, give me a second, that's going to get a bit too loud. Hold on. Oh, how do I stop it? Okay, so I just finally worked out where the pause button was. You would have thought I would have done this before, wouldn't you? Anyways, the point that I was making here, which is a really good point, the file there that we're playing from that SSD is essentially one of the highest bitrate video files you would ever be likely to want to play on the iPhone from external media. So like I say, that whole thing there is just super impressive. Anyway, let me just get on to the actual speed test results as far as megabytes per second are concerned. Okay, so to the megabytes per second then, and just before I get into this, I want to explain that Apple do indeed use base 10 for calculating storage and not base 2. So what that means is 1,000 kilobytes equals 1 megabyte, and 1,000 megabytes equals 1 gigabyte, so on and so forth, and not the older legacy base 2 way of working out storage as in 1024. So they do not use 1024 for the amount of kilobytes within a megabyte and 1024 megabytes in a gigabyte and so on and so forth. So like I say, this is base 10 and not base 2, and this is absolutely correct, and this is how Apple do their measurements. So with that said, we have got a file which is 72,026 megabytes in size. So when we look at the iPhone to the SSD speed test, that took 1 minute and 19 seconds, which is 79 seconds. So if we divide 72,026 by 79, we get 911, which is 911 megabytes per second. And then when we look at going from the SSD to the iPhone, that was done in 1 minute and 15 seconds, which is 75 seconds. So when we divide 72,026 by 75, we get 960 megabytes per second. Now, just a quick note on that before I go to my end summary. I have done a lot of extensive testing with this particular iPhone and doing a lot of disk speed testing. Those numbers there of 911 megabytes per second and 960, they are definitely at the higher range of what the phone is capable of doing. Even if I use a much faster drive technically, I still will not be able to exceed those types of numbers. So effectively here, what we are getting is a drive which is not at all expensive, but will give us possibly the fastest data rates we are able to get out of this particular iPhone. And for anybody who is interested, there will be a link in the video description to another similar video to this where I done the speed test with the Samsung T7, and as you will see, the results here are noticeably way better than what they were with the T7. Okay, so as far as an end summary is concerned, and I think maybe the only thing to really concentrate on here is the fact that this particular combination definitely works. Okay, there's absolutely no kind of like messing around with it. You plug it in and it works. However, there is one thing obviously, and that is you will have to format the drive before you can use it on the iPhone 15. Now, I can't remember if I've already mentioned, but when you take the drive or the SSD straight out and put it in the enclosure and then connect it directly to the iPhone, it will not see anything. Now, I can't remember now if whether or not these are meant to be like pre-formatted to exFAT, but in this instance, it looked like that the SSD hadn't been formatted to anything brand new out of the box. So like I say, you will have to format the drive within inside a computer. Now, that can be a Windows PC or a Mac PC, doesn't matter, and you probably are best off formatting to exFAT. You can do a PFS if you want, but exFAT will be the format that will allow you to use the drive on a bunch of other things. So as for instance, you might use iPhone, for instance, for your phone, but you might be using Windows for your computers and stuff, in which case you definitely would want to have exFAT formatting for the drive. So like I say, in this instance, I would totally recommend exFAT as the format. Now, just a few answers here for potential questions that people may have. Does this drive heat up? Yes, it does. However, it gets nowhere near as hot or as warm as other combinations that I have tried. Now, I'm going to surmise here, but this particular SSD doesn't have DRAM on it, so that's one other element which won't be taking up power and which also then won't be generating heat. But whatever the reason is, this particular SSD, the 980, definitely does run cooler than near enough everything else that I've tried. I mean, obviously I've been trying Gen 4 drives and stuff like that, obviously to no success unless I use, say, an external like powered hub or something. But the problem with drives like that, they are going to really heat up. Now, even out of the Gen 3 options, I still think that this 980 is one of like the cooler running drives. So yes, it will heat up over like a long period of time, doing like very excessive data dumps. However, it is nothing to worry about, and it is basically cooler than most of the things that I've personally tried. Once the drive starts filling up to its maximum, will it still sustain these types of read and write speeds? Well, once it gets right to the very edge of like, you know, its maximum capacity, it probably will start falling off a little bit. But I've already done stuff where I've put like 500 gigabytes on the drive and then carried on testing it, and at no point doing any of that did it slow down. It basically maintained those speeds right the way through to the drive being half full and then other things going off and on the drive. Will the drive be able to sustain those types of read and write speeds if you are using like hundreds of tiny files being like moved backwards and forwards to the drive? Absolutely not. What you will find when you're using like loads and loads of very small files, all SSDs will slow down at that point, not just this one. So that is something that will affect any type of drive. And in fact, if you're using a traditional mechanical hard drive and you're using tons and tons of tiny little small files, they're even worse. So yes, whilst this will slow down in that particular scenario, it's only going to slow down probably by the same amount that any SSD would. However, it is highly unlikely that when dealing with something like an iPhone 15, that the types of files that you're going to be transferring are super tiny small files. What it is, most people who are going to be transferring stuff onto an SSD to and from an iPhone 15 are likely to be doing stuff like, say, picture files, music files, video files, stuff of that nature. Now, in that instance, even though you might look at, say, something as being, say, 20 megabytes in size, in like, you know, drive terms or storage terms, that's not actually a small file. So what you will find, if you start like transferring, say, hundreds of, say, JPEGs or maybe even MP3s or whatever music format or audio formatted like files that you might be using, as well as the videos, you're probably going to find that those speeds there are probably going to be very similar across all of those types of formats for like the media and stuff. So the likes of JPEGs, music files and stuff like that, as well as the video files. Like I say, although it might sound like those files are small, as far as like, you know, the drive systems are concerned and stuff like that, they are relatively big files, so they are actually quite easy to write very fast or read very fast. Will you get these speeds using a standard iPhone 15 or iPhone 15 Plus? Absolutely not. They are going to be way slower speeds, and that's just because the iPhone 15 and the 15 Plus only use a 480 megabits per second bus on their USB-C ports, which effectively is 60 megabytes per second at its fastest. So unfortunately, due to the limitations of the 15 and the 15 Plus, no, you will not get those speeds. However, the drive will still be super reliable on those two particular phones as well. Anyways, I'm not entirely sure how long this video has been up to this point, but I'm going to hazard a guess it has been quite long, so I'm going to get off now. But before I do, there will be Amazon links in the video description below for everything used in the video. If you have liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you super liked the video, a subscription to the channel would be absolutely awesome. I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.